All right, so now we're going to be talking about sensation and perception. Objective, subjective. So what I mean by that is, right now I look super big to you, but me is still the same. Now I look much smaller to you, but me is still the same. The sensation you're getting is a visual stimulus of me, but your perception of that is relative to your own perspective. If you're far away from a jet engine, if it's up in the sky, you might hear it a little bit. Your perception of it is that it's a little bit noisy, but if you're standing right next to it, the same sensation, these air waves that are rippling through, the compression of air molecules going through at a really high volume and rate and frequency, your perception of it has to do with where you are in relationship to that sensation. Sensation is basically something that your sensory organs, or your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and skin, body, can sense. There we go. Whereas perception has to do with your brain's interpretation of that information. So the perception is basically what your brain does with these processes that you're experiencing and providing you with a sensory perception of those things. Sensory perception is that you've detected a stimulus in your environment. Perception is that your brain is doing something to make you aware of it, make you alert about that particular thing. All right, the typical 5 senses that we talk about are taste, touch, hearing, vision, and smell. However, scientists use different words to describe those same sensations, the same sensory organs and the systems by which we have perceptions of those different stimuli. If we talk about smell, smell is not called smell in research. It's called olfactory sensation. Olfactory. Olfactory sensation is basically you detecting odorant molecules with some specialized neurons that are in your nasal cavity. Sight is called vision. That's synonymous, and the word that we use to describe our sensation using the light that refracts off of the world and bounces into our sensory organs in our eye. Touch. We don't call it touch, they call it somatosensory. Somatosensory is basically the ability for pressure and temperature to be detected, vibrations to be detected by our body's senses. It's also wraps up our body's sense of where it is in space, that I know my arm is out here, and so if I wanted to lift my arm, I'd have to do that, rather than if I had to lift my arm from this position, it would do a different motion, right? Somatosensory is both your body sense of touch and your body sense of proprioception is the word that we call that. Okay. The next one is hearing. Hearing isn't called hearing. Now we call it audition. Audition is your ability to detect, again, the compressed air molecules as they move through your environment. And finally, taste. Taste has the most interesting name. It's not taste, it's called your sense's gustatory sense. Gustatory. Your gustatory sense is our ability to taste, again, broken down chemicals in our mouths that tell us what type of food we are ingesting. Alright, it's a little loud out here because my son's mowing the lawn. Thankfully he's doing something, I'm not having to do it. You probably can't hear me very well. You probably can only hear that. Maybe I should be talking about the sensation of audition. What that engine is doing to compress air molecules tightly and then they reverberate out towards our pinna, not your ear. But I'm supposed to talk about transduction next, so let's do that. Transduction is a big word that means taking the outside world and turning it into an internal neural impulse via your sensory neurons to enable perception. Transduction is taking the outside world and making an internal neural impulse that we can detect and then create an aggregate of those sensory neuron responses and activities. We can aggregate them together and your brain creates for you a sensory perception. I'm guessing you're having a sensory perception of that lawnmower right now, so I'll wait for a second. All right, back to transduction. One more thing. In microbiology, this means something else, but it's also relevant to humans because we're biological creatures. Transduction, in that sense, doesn't have to do with sensory perception. It has to do with transferring of genetic code from one bacteria to another microorganism. And that's something that we're not going to cover here. But when you take your microbiome class or your biology 300 class or something like that, you might hear transduction there. Again, what we're kind of talking about is the transfer of information, if you will, across a duct. A duct, if you think of as a tube from one thing to another. So for us, transduction occurs from our sensory neurons into our nervous system, our central nervous system, exactly. But in transduction in the microbiological terms, that has to do with moving information that is genes from one organism to a different one. Hi, I'm back. We're going to talk about taste. Taste now is the gustatory sense. Gustatory sense is basically the idea that on your tongue, you've got different taste receptors. The different types are fungiform, foliate, circumvallate, and filiform. The last one doesn't actually contain any taste buds in it, but those other kinds are different shapes of structures that line your tongue in different places, right? The front one has the sort of sweet taste, sides have the bitter, the back is sour. These are different taste buds, and taste buds basically are looking for chemicals. So let's talk about why they're looking for those certain chemicals and what does that help a person do. Now I like that taste, but that taste is bitter. Now, if you think about out in nature, what a taste of bitter might recognize for people is a level of toxicity. And toxicity is something that is dangerous for animals to ingest. So plants that spend their chemical energy, their metabolism to create a bitter chemical that can be detected by animals makes animals less likely to eat that. I can overcome it to taste that bitterness that's just at that perfect level where I've become used to it. Other things like, say, sweeter tastes, sugary tastes have a very different thing. Sugar is the way that our body is going to quickly store up food for future. Right now I'm shooting this in the summer and it's very hot outside, so our bodies don't need that type of extra sugar that's hanging around as fat for a future storage of food sources. But our ability to taste something sweet is really important. When babies are born, the first food that they should get from the mother is this colostrum from their breasts. And the colostrum is a sweet substance that basically is saying to the baby, this is where your source of food is going to come from. And babies get a real dopamine hit from that, a real buzz when they get the colostrum. And what that also does is it kickstarts that sort of feeding process. So sweet is something that we taste initially and something that we want to grab hold of when we get foods in us. The problem is that if we eat too much sweet things, we'll see when we go into health and stress that our body stores that as fat. And now that we don't have the type of privation that our ancestors who evolved to need to store fat for the winter, since we don't have that type of privation anymore, we're storing all that fat and then we're continuing to go to the next season where we're eating more and more and more and getting fatter and fatter and fatter, causing obesity and epidemics of heart problems and blood pressure issues and an unhealthy nature of being so overweight that we can't move and we struggle with our health because of our weight. The mechanism to do that is to survive. So again, we've developed this taste, this gustatory sense to prefer those sugars to survive, but then it's turned into something where when we eat more of the calories than we need, the caloric intake that we need, the quick hits from the sugar, we store that as fat, and it causes us to have problems. Now, the other tastes, so I've gone over bitter, I've gone over sweet. The other tastes are sour. Now, sour is a taste of, if I had a big carton of milk out here that had been sitting out in the Sacramento heat for a week, it would turn sour, and if you drank that, you would, your taste receptors in your tongue, the taste buds, would signal to your brain, don't ingest this. This is bad. Spit it out. And that reaction to sour things is really important. Now, we also can overcome that reaction to sour foods. If you think about it, my kids and my wife, they both love, or all four of them love Sour Patch Kids, which, yeah, they're okay. I'm not a big fan of them. But those Sour Patch Kids activate not only the sugar, but the sour receptors in your tongue. Some sour things are good. Some beers are sour. I don't like sour beers. This is regular old blonde beer. South Lake Tahoe. My friend brought it for me. And then the last one is my favorite, salty. So salty foods. My favorite food of all time, Tostitos lime chips, has the perfect amount of both those last two tastes, that sour, the lime sourness, and then also the salt. That salt is a really important taste for people to detect, because if they can ingest saltiness into their diet, they're able to retain more water. Now, thinking about human evolution and coming out of the Fertile Crescent, out of the beautiful areas in Africa where humans first took place, as they did, they needed to be able to traverse large distances. And if you know anything about human metabolism, the way we store water, your body's approximately 65-70% water. So what you're looking at, 70%, 7 out of 10 things here are water molecules. In order to store that, rather than to pee out everything that you drink, you need to have salt in your diet. And if you have a sufficient amount of sodium in your diet, that's the ion Na+, that's what your tongue is detecting when it's detecting a saltiness, right? There's an ion, there's a chemical that has, we talked about sodium ions when we talked about brain functioning. But in your mouth, that sodium ion is really important to detect, because your body's able to take on more water and therefore create sort of a camel-like existence, right? Where you can maintain your hydration over longer periods of time. People who are hyponatremic, hypo means not having enough. Natremia is referring to Na. Natremia is referring to sodium, not, I don't know, whatever natremia might mean other than that. But hyponatremia is when you don't have sufficient salt in your system. There was a story about a radio program here before I moved to Sacramento. This was a while back. There was a radio program. This is so far back, I'll tell you how far back it is. They were having a Christmas contest, and the Christmas contest was to see how much water somebody could drink without peeing. And a woman, a single mother, who really wanted to get her son this Christmas present, this Wii, the Nintendo Wii. Think about how old that is. That was when it first came out. It was the hottest item on the market that's Christmas, and this radio show had one, and they were offering it to her, and she drank so much water. What she did is she replaced all the fluids in her system without putting any more salt in. Now, if you remember about how those neurons work, that they flood in the sodium, and then that can send the signal along, what she did was put so much water in her system without peeing it out that she killed herself. She went into multi-organ shutdown because those organs couldn't send any signals. She had so much water on board, and she didn't get rid of the amount of water. She titrated herself up to sufficiently so that the fluid in her body didn't have enough salt to even signal those nerves. And that's a real problem. Hyponatremia is also a metabolic disorder. So there's a need for people to eat salty foods at a sufficient amount such that their body can maintain the water. And that is taste, or gustatory sense. Anything else I wanted to tell you about taste? Oh, yes. Taste is the least important of all your senses. It sounds pretty important because I just said a lady died from not having enough salt, and you can detect toxins with bitter stuff, or sour things tell you not to eat it, and sugar tells you it's really good for storing food. But if you had some horrible experience, if there's an evil genie that you rub a bottle and pops out and it doesn't give you 3 wishes, says, I'm going to take away one of your senses, offer them up taste. And the reason being is taste isn't necessarily something that you need to survive. Because nowadays we have a sufficient food supply that we don't need to go out into the bush and start picking berries and figuring out which ones are toxic, which ones are past prime, and which ones have sufficient nutrients for our bodies. So we don't need that now. And our sense of taste is also not about the gustatory sense. Gustatory sense is just that sort of detection of the molecules that are broken down into ions that then we detect with our tongue's taste buds inside those circumvallate foliate papillae. But the sense of smell, which I'll get to next, is another chemical sense, right? Where we're detecting an actual chemical in the environment. These are aerosolized ones. You've heard a lot about that because of recent viral spreading, right? So you don't have to, there's no droplets coming your way. But I'm not sick, not that I know of. But nonetheless, the sense of smell is so much more about what we experience as taste than our tongue's ability to taste these different senses. I didn't get to the last sense of taste. I did sweet and salt and bitter and sour, but I didn't do the last one. There's a 5th one, and it's called umami. Now, I believe it was named that because of it. That's a Japanese word referring to something savory, not unagi, like if you're a Friends fan. You've been watching Netflix Friends. It's not unagi, it's umami. And umami refers to the savoriness of foods that are high in proteins, like our steaks, right? And a really well cooked, high protein meal is going to have a savory flavor to it that our tongue also detects. And that's an important one to detect because proteins are going to give us longer term energy than those sugary ones. So your system is developed to discern what you can eat and what it's going to give you. The sense of smell, though, is much more about how you take in your sense of flavor, or what something to you like tastes like, has a lot more to do with your sense of smell than your sense of taste. So again, if the evil genie comes and takes away one of your senses, don't go blind, don't go deaf, don't go without smell or somatosensory sense, go without taste. If you've ever burned your tongue, you drink too hot chocolate when you're a kid or something, you burn your tongue, what you'll notice is your taste buds regenerate. This is a weird thing because if you damage your eye, you damage your ears, we'll see later, those sensory neurons aren't going to regenerate, but the sensory neurons in your tongue will. So that's why I always say you could trick the evil genie who's going to take away one of your senses if you offer up the taste of gustatory. Now, I spent a lot of time on this. Let's move on to other more important senses.